you had that epiphany that I need to shift my mindset to helping versus just needing help. I
Yeah.
need to shift to give versus get. And isn't it interesting the paradox of life that you have to give to get?
Mm-hmm.
You have to
Yeah.
give up to
Mm-hmm.
win.
Welcome back to the Man Maker Show. We are dedicated to helping men become stronger and more intentional leaders because the fight in every man's life is real and you were created to overcome. We know that hard times make better men, and through adversity, we find our inner warrior. Thanks for showing up and opening your mind in order to make your future greater than your past. Here's your host, Brad Walgamot.
What's up?
Just hitting all the right buttons. Well, welcome to the Man Maker Show. Bradley Wogelbach here with my guest today, Mr. Keith Sconiers. Keith and I go back. We were arguing offline about how many years to go back, but at 10 to 20 years, we're gonna settle somewhere in there. I met Keith through a series of friends. Some of those friendships have drifted off in different patterns, but Keith and I have always stayed in touch. And sometimes you don't know why, but they just happen that way. I think we have a kindred spirit, although we have very different paths. We have a spirit of overcoming, a spirit of becoming, and a spirit to really want to make an impact. So, welcome back to the Man Maker Show, Keith. It's great to have you. I'm super stoked to have you. It's been a dream of mine. We've just continued to just run into each other for some reason. I guess that's someone you're doing is you are a person that is passionate about greatness. You're assertive in your relationships. You're very purposeful in staying connected, and I value that greatly.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't always that way. And
Okay.
once in a while, Keith, you've let me in a few of the shadows of your shadow life, if you will, your early days. You're big enough to be an NBA player, but you didn't really pick the game up till late. Childhood was interesting. I don't want to tell your story, but man, would you mind? Whatever you feel comfortable with, that's up to you, of course. But I just love our viewers to know a little more about the early DNA of
Mm-hmm.
Keith Sconiers, and then would potentially transition into some of that decision making that said, okay, it's time to change.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm gonna leave the floor to you, my friend. It's great to have you.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I appreciate it. And you're right. This is such a dream come true. One that I didn't know that I had. And I think the last time we were together down in Florida, you may have thought, it was like, what is wrong with this guy? He is emotional at the airport because it was such a dream come true to be able to attend a personal development conference with John Maxwell together. And man, it was just such an impactful weekend on multiple levels. And it's totally a dream come true to be able to help people, inspire people together, and to just have a positive impact on the world, which is like you mentioned, it didn't start that way for me, you know. And so for our listeners, the people that are listening in right now, my name's Keith Sconiers, storyteller, entrepreneur, catalyst, and all those things. But where it started was in Fresno, California. I was a born young boy, born to my mom and my dad, who were very successful prior to me being born. My family owned several $1 million of real estate before I was born. My dad had been building houses since he was 14 years old with my grandfather, who was a military veteran who was discharged for medical reasons, who had a tumor on the base of his brain that took him at the age of 41. But during that decade prior to me being born in the 60s, he built my grandmother a 6-bedroom house on a half an acre from recycled wood that he got as a part of a contract to tear down homes for eminent domain. So my grandfather left a legacy for my family, which was in the real estate space. And my dad was part of carrying that legacy forward. And my mom was on that path to help carry that legacy as well, because she was at the time working as a cook in the kitchen at a restaurant, but she was very interested in real estate. So she would go on to become a real estate agent. And so the deal was between her and my dad was that he'd build them and that she'd sell them.
Mm-hmm.
And so as a young boy, I was considered probably the real estate kid to a lot of people because I was at every job site, I was at every open house, right? And people would have thought that, man, that kid right there is going to be set up, right? And you think about the foundation,
Yeah.
especially when you think about, the work that they were doing. My dad was one
Right.
of the best that I'd ever seen with a hammer in his hand. And so
Wow.
he was the best in that area when it came to real estate. And so, unfortunately, my family lost several $1,000,000 of real estate prior to me being born. And my dad ended up getting involved in the wrong crowd, which involved selling drugs and then going to prison and then starting to use drugs. And then my mom is just taking care of two little boys all by herself, doing the best that she can. My mom used to walk. My mom used to walk several miles to the bus stop to make sure that she could go to work. She was pregnant.
Wow.
Um, prior to her meeting my stepdad, and so my mom was just incredible person, still is to this day. But you know, it was hard. It was hard being the child of, you know, a single mom and not knowing where your dad's at, you know. And I remember at a very young age, prior to her meeting my stepfather, my aunt Priscilla picked us up and took us to Tracy State Penitentiary, which is a maximum security state penitentiary in California. And I remember it like it was yesterday because I
Wow.
was wearing my sweater, my Halloween sweater that glowed in the dark, white body, black sleeves. I still remember everything I was wearing that day. I still remember the entire car ride on the way over there because it was one of the greatest days of my life because I was going to go see daddy, right? Because I love my dad. My dad is my hero still to this day, despite his shortcomings.
Wow.
But my mom ended up getting married probably around the time that I was in first, second grade. Met a man, my stepfather, who was a great man, former NFL player, who was a great man, but you know, he came in to take care of two boys, but he was also abusive, right? Old school disciplinary style abuse. We would get whooped with extension cords, tree branches, you name it. We'd get waken up in the middle of our sleep if we didn't wash the dishes with a extension cord on our back. And so Child Protective Services stepped in and took custody of my brother and I
Wow.
when I was going into the fifth grade. And I remember prior to that time crying myself to sleep because I missed my dad so much. You know,
Wow.
I don't know. I think we come into the world and we have our parents and we're just wired for one of them. I think a little stronger than the other. And
Yeah.
I was definitely wired as his boy.
Wow.
So custody was given to my biological dad when I was going into the fifth grade, and he was still battling addiction, incarceration, mental health issues. And I lived with him during the worst period of time of his addiction
Wow.
from the fifth to the eighth grade. I unfortunately got exposed to a lot of things there, lost my virginity to a drug addict in the sixth grade. I was oftentimes left home alone several days at a time because he would, you know, work hard. I'd go to work with him a lot of times. He was brilliant, but then he'd get paid. And then he would just, the pain of him losing his dad at 14 um, and losing several $1,000,000 of real estate and all of those things wouldn't allow him to have the peace and um, the mental health to be able to take care of a young boy. And so from the fifth to the eighth grade, I got expelled 6 times before I got to high school. I was banned from campus in fifth grade. Um, and just, you know, 6, 7, 8 different homes in 3 years. Just, you know, battling with life, right? And unfortunately, my dad got sent back to prison. And so he had to go back on what we would call vacation. And I went to live with my grandmother. And went to live with my grandmother freshman year in high school, 1.3 GPA, going nowhere, right?
Mm.
Getting kicked off campus. I was, you know, kicked off campus as well my freshman year in high school. And one day, a coach passes by me and says, "Hey, kid, why aren't you playing basketball? You know, I'm 6'5" at the time, 210 pounds, and never played sports because my stepdad was really into sports. Obviously, he was a coach, and we didn't have that great of a relationship. We actually repaired our relationship. We have a great relationship today. Um,
Wow.
but during that time, I didn't do sports because my stepdad was really into sports. And so I ended up taking my coach's advice and starting to play basketball. He basically put me on the team. And that was the start of a change for me because four
Mm.
years later, everything he said came true. I became a Division I athlete, came to Portland State, played basketball, didn't play the role that I wanted to play, but, you know, was able to play at the Division I level, play against a lot of NBA players, a lot of professional players, a lot of great Division I players, athletes all around the world, and got done in 2006 bitter, frustrated because I didn't play the role that I wanted to play. I think everybody wants to be the star, especially when you work as hard as I did. I tore an ACL my sophomore year in college, came back in 4.5 months. So I think when you come back from something like that, put so much, that's just unheard of. Nobody comes back from ACL in 4.5 months. But I think when you work that hard, you expect to get the results, and I didn't. And I left bitter. I left committed to becoming successful, and I succeeded. I successfully launched the worst career launch in world history. 17 jobs in 10 years, on the verge of bankruptcy, sleeping on the floor of a furnitureless apartment. And what's unique about my story, Brad, is that I was doing everything that I could to figure it out. Right. I was going to all the conferences. I was doing the books, tapes, and functions. Right. I was doing everything that I could to become successful. And it seemed like the harder I worked, the worse it got. You know, and one night I slept on the floor of my furnitureless apartment, and I promised to God that if he would ever help me get off of that floor, that I would do everything that I could to help other people do the same.
Wow.
And that is what brought me to where I am today, where I run a podcast called Purpose. You know, I run a couple different businesses, but I've dedicated my life to helping people figure out who they are, what they want, and how to get it without violating what is the most important thing to them, which is their purpose.
Wow. Well, that's amazing, Keith. I could take that a million different directions. If you don't mind, I'll just get a couple thoughts that were just crushing through my brain. And that is that I have looked at progress or going backwards life as a mathematical equation. This is how I could make it work in my brain when I was young, is that we start at zero. And negative things happen, they create a negative number. Positive things happen, you get a positive number. So if the first 15 years of your life, you have more negative events than positive events, that creates more negative thoughts than positive thoughts, which creates a lower self-image. You're in the deficit, right? So you have a negative, right? And depending on the magnitude of that number, you know, you could get pretty low to a point where what we've seen, only answer is I need to escape. And they medicate with a variety of different things, right? And so you saw the devastation of that and had enough wherewithal to go, okay, that's going to take me further down. So you started listening to your coach and you started getting some positives, right? Nice shot. Way to go. You're here early. Using you as an example, making some baskets. You probably were terrible at high school. You never played, right? Here comes a 6'5" giant. They say just rebound. That's all they want you to do, right? And eventually you learned a few moves and drop steps and so forth. And before you know it, you're going to get a chance to play against the NBA guys. But to me, you were just kind of getting up towards zero. You were probably still in a deficit. And then when you get out of basketball, you had a couple of knockbacks, right? A couple of guys didn't believe in you, probably. A couple got cheated by a few, you know, egos here and there and power trip people. And some people probably tried to use you in a way that made them be better, do better. You know, that's kind of the manipulation of life. And those are negatives. So then you start reading, and we've taught for years, right? Input, thoughts, words, action, habit, character, destiny, right? So input is audios and books and association. You were pounding it, but you were trying to get to zero. And you know, I would tend to surmise that your 0 point was when you shifted from what can I get to what can I add. You went from being a consumer to being a contributor. You made a solution, like you're on the floor. And I remember having a similar moment in my apartment that had a beanbag chair, so I was one step up on you. And I remember thinking, Lord God, if you'll ever give me my ship to sail on, I'll sail it, right? I will do it. I will raise my sails and go. Just give me a chance. If you just give me a chance, right? And I really wasn't a believer. I really didn't have a walk with God. I just believed in something had to be greater or worse than me out there, maybe listening. And I was crying out to the universe, as they would say today. And guess what? God does hear prayers and things do happen. And people have had different encounters and different experiences. But I would believe at that moment, the shift, when you had got to a point, Keith, where you believed you could add value. Right? When we live in a deficit, we're like, what can I add? Where do I add value? I mean, what? I'm a consumer. I got to consume just to get to zero. And people need to be okay being below zero and recognizing it's going to take some time. You know, if you were skin and bones and hadn't eaten in months, you're not going to go out and be a football player or a marathon. You're going to have to rebuild your entire cellular structure, add muscle and tissue and all that strength. It takes time to the point where you can consider training, right?
Yeah.
So I think mental development is even more difficult because no one can see it. You know, like, oh, you're adding weight. Oh, you're getting slower. You're fasting.
Right.
No, it's all inside stuff, right? But
yeah.
in that moment, you had that epiphany that I need to shift my mindset to helping versus just needing help. I need to shift to give versus get. And isn't it interesting, the paradox of life, that you have to give to get? You have to give up to win. You got to let your ego go, so you stop edging God out to go out and make an impact. So let me just first of all say publicly, and I've said it before you privately, I am so proud to be your friend. I'm so proud to know you, because we know there are a lot of stories that have gone the other direction.
Yeah.
Right. And I don't know if the word easily that could have happened, but certainly the opportunity to be bitter, angry, and acting out in a variety of ways could have taken you on a path. And I'm just so thankful for the millions of people that will be inspired. And I know this is not something you would say, but I'm going to say it for you, because you got back up and you made different choices. And not that you're better, because I know you don't believe that and you're not better. It's just that you've decided to not look backward and let it be an anchor, right? You led in that PTSA versus PTSD, that post-traumatic stress acceleration kicking in your life, right? Where you're like, yeah, there was a lot of bad, but I'm going to accelerate out of that. So let's talk about acceleration for a second, Keith. What happened next, right? You're on the floor, you're asking, and where to go from there? This is what, you're in your 20s now, mid-20s at this point?
Yeah. I'm probably 25.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm right in. Yeah, it's a couple years before I had my first son. So,
all right,
actually, my only son. But maybe there's something on the way. Who knows? That'd be awesome. Such a blessing, man. That'd be such a blessing.
Yeah, sure.
But yeah, I think from that point, it was still several years. I didn't really get a breakthrough, I felt like, until I left my job, which was 7 years ago on March 31st.
Wow.
Right. Which that is at the age of, gosh, I'll be 41. So I'll be at the age of 34.
Yeah.
It seemed like yesterday. It seemed like yesterday.
It is. Time paper.
My 17th job was a nonprofit, was a school that I'd gone to school, I'd gone and worked at, because I'd worked in sales for a decade, and it just seemed like it never worked. And I think the reason why it never worked was because, I have these core values, right? One of them has to do with what a drug dealer taught me about sales, right? The drug dealer in my neighborhood had the nice car, had the nice sounds, had the nice rims, had the nice everything, right? He had everything. And when I'd go to bed at night and I'd wake up and my TV would be gone, or the food would be gone out of the refrigerator, it'd be at his house. Right? And the reason why I believe that I'd wash out of so many sales positions was because in the corporate world, it's so much about just the money, right? That it would just break my heart. And within 6 months, I'd lose the passion for it, and I couldn't perform anymore. So I'd get fired. So I'd gone to work at a nonprofit school because I was done with it, And I guess to answer your question in terms of what did I do next, I started to realize that all the power isn't in skill set and goals and the things that I want. All the power is in core values. And so I started making decisions at work that were based on my core values. For an example, when I discovered that I was not going to make the money that I really needed to make to take care of my family at that nonprofit, and when I started to sense that my skill set wasn't being used to its highest potential, and when I started to understand that there was probably someone else that'd be more enthusiastic about the role that I was going to be in, I put in my notice and told them that they should start looking for someone to hire. I didn't have any savings when I started my business in 2017. I didn't have a business plan, but I knew that I couldn't take another dollar from that nonprofit because it would violate my core value of integrity.
Wow.
Right. And so it is in the learning and the understanding of core values and where it has broken my family. Right. When I look back on why real estate was lost or how my dad got involved in the wrong crowd, it was in the violation of core values. And so where it changed for me was when I became man enough. Right. And I'll say that again, is when I became man enough to first and foremost sit down and discover what were the things that I was going to live my life by, that I was going to be willing to die for, but most importantly, live for, that my life began to change.
Yeah.
That's the first time when I started making decisions like that. This happened in the previous role at my 16th job in 10 years, where I had sold a brand, a restaurant, 10 location restaurant. They were a new customer of ours. I told them they were going to save $20,000-$30,000 when I first went to work at this company. And I started looking at their reports and, about 3 months in, and I'm like, man, they're not saving that $20,000 that I told them they were going to save. I run a payment processing business today, which deals with that. And I didn't know when I set them up that it wasn't going to work because I was brand new to the industry. But as I learned more and more, and as I started to evaluate their account one night, 3 months into them working with us, I realized they weren't saving money. And so I had to call the company and tell them we need to change the pricing. And they said, hey, Mr. Sconiers, that sounds great that you want to do the right thing here, but you do know that you're going to have to pay back the $20,000 in commissions you got. And I said, let's go for it. Right. Mind you, I had just worked my 15th job was as an insurance agent, where I paid to be an insurance agent for the previous 12 months. So I didn't have any money. So to pay back $20,000 was a pretty big deal for me, even if I had money, right? But when I did that, it was the first time my entire life at the age of 33 that I actually was proud of myself. Right? So it didn't start with any other decision other than I'm going to start honoring my core values. I'm going to start doing the right thing no matter what it costs.
Yeah.
And what I found is that it didn't cost anything. It gave me everything for the first time in my life. That's where the change actually happened.
Yeah, that's really profound. Yeah, I've heard a lot of people say over years, I'd take a bullet for my family, right? It's a common thing, macho man, and we all would, right? We would gladly if it was between me and my family, for sure. But I think a greater question is, not only would you die for your family, would you change the way you live for your family?
Yeah.
Right. Because that's a much harder one to fall through. You get shot and you die, and that's tragic, of course. I mean, to make light of that, but your struggle's over. The decision to live every day of your life with a new set of core values that may cost you money and fame and fortune, may cost you a job, it may cost you a lot, but when you change the way you live for your family, you've actually made a greater sacrifice than giving your life for it. Even though I don't know if there's a greater sacrifice in life, I don't mean to make light of that. I'm just trying to draw the difference that I want people to decide to change the way they live. I don't want them to take the option to take a bullet, right? Take an emotional bullet, take a mental bullet, right? And decide what your core values are and your core principles. And that's why we call this thing the man maker, Keith. We're making men. Right? Not only is this about you becoming a better man, but as we said just a little bit ago, this is about you impacting millions of people around the world, right? And I mean, the fact that we're humble is obviously a good. You're very humble about your impact is powerful. At the same time, we don't ever want to play it so low that we don't realize, or you don't realize, the importance of staying with that covenant, because there are millions of lives that haven't heard the story yet. They need to see more. They need to see the success. And if you listen to a lot of these real wealthy, from the ground up millionaires, most of them didn't make it till their 50th birthday. Right. I mean, I think Buffett said it was like 50th birthday before he made his first million. Now his stock sells for like what, $600,000 a share or something, just one share. Right. So the idea of man, what took so long, right? We live in a world
Mhm.
where we want that instant, we want it hot, we want it now, we want it. But the reality, if you want the oak tree, you got to deal with the acorn. You got to deal with the slow growth, because fast growth wood is weak.
Mhm.
Slow growth wood is strong. And so,
Yeah.
you know, you're
Yep.
you're you're in, you're in a slow growth mode, but think of the impact of life. So maybe just take us down the road if you don't mind, Keith. Then we can spend hours here, but I try to keep this to 25, 30 minutes. Give us a little taste of where you see your life going. Dream with us a bit about Keith Sconiers, the great man. Tell us a little about where you're going, if you don't mind. Just let it
Yeah.
happen.
Yeah. For 5 years, Brad, I've been building out a platform called Catalyst Training and Development.
All right.
And the reason for that is because I know that there are millions of people who are out there infected with the disease of performance. And I believe that the greatest among you will be your servant. So I don't really have any other plans other than to do everything that I can to serve others.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I do today. And that's what I plan to do 10 years from now and
Mm-hmm.
30 years from now. Like, it's really not complicated. Of course, we have inroads to a lot of different industries, from real estate to software to, payments and things like that. But really where we spend most of our time is with this experience that I created called the power of relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Because the reason why, when I look back on, the time that I spent with my father and what was ailing him and causing him to have so many trip ups with addiction and incarceration and mental health issues, was because he was infected with some disease that prevented him from seeing the value that he possessed,
Mm-hmm.
that positioned him in such a way where he felt like he had to earn something when he was already special, right?
Mm-hmm.
He had to earn love when he was already loved, right?
Yeah.
We arrived with immense value, but we only get enough support until about the time that we start walking. And from there, it's downhill.
Mm-hmm.
Right. From there, we got to be something different. We need to be taller. Our skin needs to be lighter, or it needs to be darker, or we need to be more athletic, or we need to get a better grade, or nothing's ever good enough when we were already good enough when we arrived.
Yeah.
Right. And so for
Yeah.
the
I noticed
next,
that. This is something that's always caught me. But if you're at a store, I hate to use Walmart as an example, but it's like the greatest array of all kinds of people.
yeah.
You'll see a mom or a dad holding a baby, and
Mm-hmm.
they just can't kiss them enough, right? They just
Yeah.
like boom, 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 kiss and snuggles, and I mean, there's so much love going to a baby. But
Yeah.
as soon as the baby can act,
Yeah.
can grab,
Yeah.
can move, it's no. And
Yeah.
then those get louder and louder to a point where you see another transition of a 3-year-old or a 5-year-old, and it's just like screaming and yelling, and just like, how do I keep this little monster controlled? You were so perfect when you were exactly the way I wanted you to be.
Mm-hmm.
You're on point there. Do you mind sharing with me, just as another thought? You said the disease of performance, and that is a really interesting irony, because
Mm-hmm.
obviously performance is a very important part of prospering, working hard, achieving, having goals, paying the price. But there's a disease piece to it. Do you mind talking about maybe the mental health side of that? Is that what you're diving at?
Yeah. I don't know where everyone is in terms of their belief of, their worldview per se.
Mm-hmm.
But mine is that sin is a real thing,
Mm-hmm.
right? And the accuser is a disease,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I believe that we get infected with this disease at an early age that is not from the Father,
Mm-hmm.
right? And the
Mm-hmm.
accuser is the one who tempts you, and as soon as you act on the temptation, they condemn you,
Yep.
right? And this condemnation is what causes, I believe, so much of the pain that we see in the world. Because
Shame.
yeah, shame, bitter, all of the negative emotions that take control of our life, right? And so when I talk about the disease is of performance. is of, because we've made this act, we feel like we now don't deserve the love that we didn't even earn, and there's nothing that we can do to regain, right? Because it never left us. He says, I'll never leave you or forsake you, right? But we, because of our actions, because of our shortcomings, because of bad decisions or blind spots or things that happen to us, we believe that we don't deserve to be loved. And I'm here to tell everyone that's listening in today, my father today, in all of his brokenness, is still my hero. There's nothing that he could have done to lose that, right? Because in his brokenness, he shared with me. He was vulnerable. He was transparent. There were so many of his core values that he shared with me in his brokenness that has shaped who I am. I wouldn't be here today if I hadn't experienced living with my father, right? If I didn't go through the things that I was put through. One night, and I'll share this, you talk about PTSA. When one of my core values is responsibility. And when I think about where that came from, it came from me being left home on a Tuesday night for several days. My dad didn't come home until Friday morning. He showed up at school on Friday morning. And on Wednesday night, I was watching the news and I thought that my dad had died because there was a physical altercation that ended in a death in this neighborhood where he would go whenever he was using drugs, right? And there'd be times where I'd be with him and there would be raids and there would be gang violence and there would be things that would happen in this neighborhood. And I'm watching the news and I'm seeing them report on a death in this neighborhood. And my dad hadn't been home for a couple of days. And I'm thinking that my father's gone. And I'm crying myself to sleep and I'm just distraught because this is the first time that I've been left home alone for several days. And I still went to school. 7th grader. I still went to school, right? And so when you talk about PTSA and acceleration, I think that we need to go back. And we need to go back and figure out, what did we really learn from these painful experiences that we've been through? Because if we can squeeze what is good out of the bad experience, then it becomes the reason we're successful, not us becoming successful in spite of it. Right? So that's how we use those things to multiply our efforts, our commitments, our contributions to the world that we want to create around us. And so I wanted to make sure I shared that, because I think that you talked about the deficit and those things that knock us down, but those things could also be the reasons we succeed. I believe that had those things not happened, there's no way that I'd be able to do the things that I do today and build the businesses and relate to people in the way that I relate to people.
For sure. The unfortunate reality is a lot of people keep going down. Right? But those things they didn't make you, but they prepared you so that you made different decisions that gave you a new result.
Yeah.
And Keith, this time has flown by. We could spend hours, so let's circle back on this on another episode. I'm so blessed by your transparency, your heart, your kindness. Love your hat, love your faith. It was just we could go for hours. So hopefully we'll have you back again for another episode of the Man Maker Show with Mr. Keith Sconiers. Thank you for your time, and let's just keep changing lives now, brother.
Yep, you too. Absolutely. Take care.
Changing lives. All right. See you soon, brother.